Hey, it's Drybear, back again with another Diablo 4 build guide, and today we're going to be talking about my Arctic Splinter Sorcerer build. There's actually quite a few Sorcerer, Sorceress builds that you can utilize Ice with, focus on the debuff of Frozen, Vulnerability, Chill, and a few of the Frozen abilities that have that element. And I've already done some of these on my channel, so if you're looking for Frozen specific builds, you'll find those there. But today we're going to focus on Ice Shards and become a little submachine gun of ice with this build specifically. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, the next time you put clothes in the washer, you're gonna forget about it, and they're gonna have a small smell, so you'll have to run the washer again before you can put them and dry them. All right, let's dive into the builds. This is going to be an Ice Sorceress build that focuses on the use of Ice Shards, and the enchantment also gives us free ice shards, and we have ways to proc that through gear as well. This build's super fun if you like focusing on ranged attacks and repositioning, and you like having that positional aspect to be really strong for you. And you're not someone who likes to focus on the frozen debuff or have specifically AoE that is a room wide. This one will have splinters that fly in every direction, and the single target is actually really good. It also takes advantage of the avalanche key passive, which gives you free mana spending and also insane increased damage for that build as well. I have the entire build built out with Paragon, skill points, legendaries, gems, all of that down in the description on d4builds.gg if you wanted to follow along with that. Just keep in mind that this is kind of an early pass on it. I think the synergies are really strong. The Paragon board's like my first pass on it until we know everything about what they have in store, because they've hinted at things that we don't even know about yet. For the launch, it's the best that I can do for now, and then once I actually get a hold and get to try out Arctic Splinter and all the content, I can make adjustments after the fact. All right, let's begin. So this is the link that's down in the description if you all want to follow along with it. This one is kind of like my Frigid Fracture build for Frozen, but the focus here is going to be primarily on lucky hit chance and ice shards specifically. So let's start like we always do with the skill build, and we'll go down the tree as you would unlock these while leveling. So you have an understanding of how the build works. Starting with our builder, we're going to get a lot of cold percent damage, which means that builder and spender, we want to be able to synergize with that. Our best option here is going to be Frost Bolt. Just a simple builder. It gives us our mana back. It deals damage, has a chance to apply chill as well of a minor amount. We also have a chance to explode on chilled enemies doing AoE, which is pretty cool. And then AoE is scaled up if they are frozen. We also generate mana when hitting chilled or frozen enemies, and once the build is complete, almost every enemy you're attacking, even if they just showed up in the room, should instantly be chilled, and if they can be frozen, there's a high chance they will be frozen as well, so we'll get lots of value out of that. Coming into our spender, we're going to pick up Ice Shards, which is your submachine gun spell. It launches out a whole bunch of little ice shards, splinters that fly out, dealing damage that gets increased if you hit a target that's frozen. We were also want to get the modifier here that it will have a chance to ricochet off of an enemy to another enemy. And if it hits a frozen enemy, it will always ricochet, which means that we get ice shards that fly off the targets that we're hitting. And with all of our gear and legendaries and uniques put together, plus these modifiers and high lucky hit chance, we actually get some pretty widespread splinters just flying all over the screen. It's really fun to watch. The last one we're going to get is it's going to be a barrier build. While you have a barrier active, casts of ice shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. This is super useful against bosses that you can't freeze because you can still get fragments that come off of it. You still get the damage scaling from that without having to worry about that, that specific debuff landing on the boss. Coming down to defense, since we do rely on a barrier for this build, we're obviously going to get the ice armor, which is a barrier. It gives you a percentage of your max life in HP, and while it's active, 5% of your damage dealt is added to the barrier, which is really cool. That means that as you're dealing damage, you can keep it alive. We also have some very common passive pickups here with Icy Veil, which increase your barrier duration, and Cold Front, which is while you have a barrier active, you apply more chill, which is useful against mobs and mobbing in dungeons. We also want to make it so that your mana regeneration is increased with ice armor. We're going to have legendaries that give us free ice armor procs as well, which is nice. So that's an easy way for us to get mana generation back. And we also want shimmering ice armor, which enemies hit while you have ice armor active have a chance to become frozen. So again, another way for us to passively trigger the frozen effect. Coming down to the conjuration tree, this is a build that I think utilizes ice blades excellently because we do need vulnerable in the build, and since we have so much cold damage and high proc chance, we have a really good way to keep ice blades active. So we're gonna come down here, we're gonna pick up ice blades. This is a conjuration. It also means we can go into the conjuration tree and get benefit from some of those conjuration changes. And then we're also gonna modify it so that the cooldown is reduced for each time it hits a vulnerable enemy, and it has the cooldown reduction that it gets is applied to all your other skills, not just ice blades. So there's a chance to make targets vulnerable when you hit a target. So there's a lucky hit chance. But we're going to be doing tons of lucky hit in this. So we'll get this cooldown proc to happen quite often, the vulnerability proc to happen quite often, and also we'll be able to apply that cooldown to other abilities, which is really nice. We're also going to pick up, because it's a lucky hit build, lucky hit chance, 15% with precision magic, an easy passive pickup for this build. We come down into the second to last tree here, and we already picked up the barrier, the 2 barrier skills. You can also get lucky hit chance to cause frozen, and if you want to, you can pull more points off of Frostbolt, as towards endgame it contributes less to your overall damage, and you can scale this lucky hit chance to freeze up quite a bit. Just remember that it's not gonna help your bossing clear speeds if you end up putting this lucky hit, because you can't freeze them. Blizzard is an easy pickup for us because it applies chill to all targets in the area. But one of the reasons we picked this up, just like we did with my Frigid Fracture build, is we want the mana reduction. So Blizzard, decent damage, good AoE, good control, easy way to apply chill. We want to get the modifiers so it does increased damage to frozen enemies. Nice, easy damage there. And lastly, while you have an active Blizzard, your core skills, which in this case is Ice Shards, our submachine gun, Sub-Zero submachine gun ability, costs less mana. And we can have Blizzard up for pretty much all the time as long as we're managing our mana properly. We come down here, we get Deep Freeze. This synergizes perfectly with all cold spells for Sorceress. This one, you turn into an ice block, you become immune. You have a legendary that allows you to heal mana and HP while you're in there. You deal damage, chill enemies, and then when it expires, it deals 100% additional damage. Casting Deep Freeze again ends the effect early. So you can cancel it early, but also gives you a nice big explosion. It's great for gathering mobs up, just like you would in like World of Warcraft. You gather them all up, you ice block as they come closer, break out of it and do your thing. Super nice. You can also make it so that you get barrier, which again, we have high synergy for that. Anytime we have a barrier active, we are going to be making our ice shards guarantee to increase damage and ricochet off the target. And when it ends, all your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced. So you can spend all of your abilities, get everything on cooldown, get down to 0 mana, pop your Deep Freeze. While it's proccing, it's reapplying chill. All of your damage is proccing, and you're getting ice spikes that come out from your gear as well. And then when it ends, boom, all of your cooldowns get reset, which then lowers the cooldown of Ice Blades, which can then lower the cooldown of your other abilities. And it's giving you very valuable resources in health and mana overall. We're going to want to pick up all of the ice packages, all the ice passives here that are super good for this. The first one, Frost Skills, deal increased damage to elites. Helps us with our single target. And remember, if there's an elite or a champion or a boss that has adds, we ricochet off that target and we passively kill the things around it without having to target anything but the boss, which is really nice. Hoarfrost means you deal increased damage to chilled enemies and even more increased damage to frozen enemies. So if an enemy can be frozen with this build, they will likely be frozen pretty regularly, and then you'll get increased damage against that target easily. Lucky hit chance, cold damage against vulnerable targets has a chance to generate mana. And remember, we're getting pretty high proc chance on the vulnerable here, which is really nice. And as that's hitting more and more, we get value out of that. And you deal increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies. So lucky chance and vulnerable, huge procs for us. We get some good value there. Coming down into the key passives, we are going to go for the Avalanche. And this is kind of like more of a cold caster key passive. Unlike Frigid Fracture, where we focused on freezing enemies and causing massive room-wide AoE damage, or even staggering bosses and get bonuses from that, we want to go for Avalanche instead, which has a lucky hit chance for, remember, we are building lucky hit for this. We specifically want lucky hit. There's a lucky hit chance from your key passive that your Frost skills will have a chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, our primary ability, or Frozen Orb, or Blizzard consume no mana and deal increased damage, and it's doubled against vulnerable enemies. Again, we have high chance against vulnerable enemies. We cause vulnerable as well, which is very awesome. And then that proc increases even more damage and the proc chance is higher as well. So all of that synergizes really well together, which makes it really fun to just pew, 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 pew. Like I said, it feels like a submachine gun. You're just shooting ice shards all over the screen. So that is the skill build. To extend that, let's go into the enchantments system. You can use 2 enchantments or no enchantments if you want with the Sorceress to choose which abilities you want to modify. And I think in this choice, there's 2 very easy winners. There's a couple ones that I think would be just fine if you wanted to pick them up, but I think these fit the best. The first is ice shards. Ice shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. So keep in mind in Diablo 4, this is a base game effect that when you spawn additional abilities, those abilities in most cases that I've tested will inherit all of the the traits and modifiers and scalars that ability has normally, which means that it's going to get your skill damage that you've leveled up. It's going to get your modifiers as well, and it's going to apply all the bonuses that you would normally get. So every time you freeze an enemy, which is most of the time, unless it's a boss, you'll get ice shards shooting out automatically, which is really cool. I also like the chance that ice armor, upon getting hit, you have a 5% chance to apply ice armor. So as you're getting hit regularly, and even through your barrier, you have a chance to get a new ice armor. We like this because it means that our ice shards does more damage and ricochets as well, which is really cool. And it gives us that barrier for barrier scaling. For gems, I think there's a couple choices to make here. I think the one that's probably the most optimal is going to be Emerald for weapon, crit damage to vulnerable enemies, easy pickup there. We have barrier generation from diamonds on armor, and then jewelry. The general theory behind this, at least in my mind, is if you end up in melee range a lot, or you don't have barrier protections or bubble protections, I think that armor is going to be better for you. And if you are at ranged or kiting or avoiding, I think resistance is better so that it's easier to avoid melee attacks if you're kiting a lot versus being in melee. And if you're running around the room, there are some elemental effects that are almost impossible to completely avoid. So the resistance, I think, has a higher value. Coming into the legendaries here, there are a couple uniques in this build. I like including uniques because I think it's something to look forward to as you grind towards the end game. Once you finally get it, you'll understand how it all fits together. In these slots specifically, there's some easy alternatives. For legs, you can just get defense. For boots, you can just get mobility. You can even pick up the one that gives you unstoppable when you have your ice armor up, which is very easy. Nice mobility option there, and it's nice to have unstoppable and casters as well. So those are your options there. But let's go through the 3 uniques in this build, and you can see how they might affect your end game performance. Temerity is an easy one to pick up. Anytime you're running a barrier build, effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant you a barrier up to 80% of your max life that lasts for 8 seconds. So you can find ways to heal yourself through this, either through party members, through your own personal healing, but it just gives you a way to generate more barriers. And again, remember, while we have barriers active, we get benefits on our main core ability. So we really want to make sure that we have barriers up. You can even run extra bonuses that when you have a barrier, you deal more damage. And there's ways you can modify the build to make that even stronger. Penitent Greaves is an easy pickup as well. You leave behind a trail of frost that chills enemies. Not only are you leaving behind a trail of frost, which applies a small amount of chill, you have chill all throughout your build. And what makes the Penitent Greaves an awesome unique for this build is that it scales your damage to targets that are chilled. And almost every enemy you encounter should be chilled unless you're AFK, because you're applying it constantly. And lastly, Ring of Starless Skies. I love this build for very mana hungry or resource hungry abilities because it reduces the cost as you deal consecutive. So I have this one in my Bloodlance build for Necromancer because you spam one ability. Incinerate fits this really well as well. Any core ability that you just hold down and it burns your resource, Starless Skies fits perfectly into. So something to look forward to, that if you're feeling like you can't hold down ice shards as long as you'd want or as often as you'd want, just know that as you get closer and closer to max level and your gear gets better, that gets easier and easier, which I think is nice while leveling, to know that there are greener pastures coming down the pipe. On Helm, I like picking up Encased Aspect. You can put this on a few slots. I like putting it on Helm because there aren't really a whole lot of choices here. This one makes it so when we cast our ultimate Deep Freeze, you restore mana and life per second for the 4 seconds that you're frozen. which again is really cool. Remember, when Deep Freeze ends, all your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced. If you have Encased Aspect, when you pop your ult, you will also regenerate HP and mana. So you can use all of your cooldowns, take a bunch of damage, throw everything down. You have passive, blizzards are running. You have ice shards that are splitting, ice spikes that are spawning up. Your ice blades are hitting, and you just pop your ultimate, which applies chill to everyone around you. You continually pulse damage. Enemies that are taking damage are storing up this big burst. When Deep Freeze ends, you have regained a whole bunch of mana and life, which means you can start going back into it again, and your cooldowns got lowered, which makes the whole flow of this build feel really good, and makes Deep Freeze, I think, fit into it just perfectly. For chest armor, I like getting Unwavering. Taking direct damage is a chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. You only have one in this build, Ice Armor. And again, with the enchantment, we have a chance to apply Ice Armor. We can cast Ice Armor. When we have cooldown reduction from Ice Blades, it lowers the cooldown of Ice Armor. Our ultimate Deep Freeze lowers the cooldown of Ice Armor. And Aspect of the Unwavering means that anytime you take direct damage, it will lower the cooldown of Ice Armor. So you can just have high uptime of Ice Armor, which not only makes you tankier, more durable, but it gives you more damage options and makes your main core ability more flexible and more powerful, because you'll be able to treat everyone as if they're frozen, even if they're a boss and they can't be frozen. So that opens up that opportunity for this build, which is really cool. For gloves, I like Biting Cold. When you freeze an enemy, there is a chance they become vulnerable. This helps your mobbing and dungeon clearing significantly, because anytime you get a freeze, there's a chance you apply vulnerable. There's also a legendary, which I don't have in this build, that you could run. This one makes it so you actually spread out. You spread out the effects. I think it's on chest armor. Shared Misery. When you hit a crowd-controlled enemy, which includes all of your crowd control, there's a chance for that to spread. So when you have Biting Cold, when you hit a freeze enemy, you apply vulnerable that can spread and spread. It can be really nice. The reason I didn't put it here is just to be mindful of a balanced build, focus on bossing and doing mob clears and dungeon clears as well. We already talked about the two uniques here. For the weapon, Ice Shards pierce 3 to 4 times, dealing damage per subsequent enemy hit. So this applies to the Ice Shards that you spawn freely and naturally, the ones that will generate when they split and fork, and then they penetrate. And you can actually get to this point where it really does feel like you're a fully automatic ice gun that's just firing in all directions, because you have Ice Shards flying everywhere, piercing, applying, splitting, spreading, and generating and spawning and flying forward again. It feels really good once you get it going. For Amulet, damaging enemy grants you a barrier. Again, the more barrier uptime we have, the better. This one's free. This one helps bridge the gap for when you have Ice Armor on cooldown, you haven't triggered the proc or lowered the cooldown on it, and you just kind of get this for free. So it's an extra barrier. Again, we get barrier generation increased. We do better on targets when we have a barrier active, and we can even run barrier damage. Like while we have a barrier, we deal more damage. And I think Aspect of the Protector gives you a nice flexible option to bridge those downtime moments where you don't have a barrier active. For the other ring, the Avalanche key passive now applies to 1 additional cast. When we're talking about the key passive Avalanche, it means that we have a lucky hit chance to make our next Ice Shards consume no mana and deal increased damage, and the chance to proc is doubled. But every time we proc Avalanche, right? So when this lucky hit proc chance goes off, if we're running Frozen Memories, it applies to the next 2 casts of Ice Shards. And you can imagine how everything we've talked about already for Ice Shards spawning and shooting, that just makes it so much cooler, because then you get no mana cost. So as you're ricocheting and submachine gunning all this ice out, it saves you mana for 2 casts instead of 1. It also gives you additional damage on that, which is really, really cool. So this makes the whole build feel even better. And if you want to run two-handed on the Aspect of Piercing Cold, you can for extra scaling. But there's also some options for offhand if you want to run this in your offhand. I think Frozen Tundra is a nice one. While Deep Freeze is active, exploding ice spikes form in the area, dealing cold damage. Your ice spikes have increased explosion radius. So it just makes Deep Freeze do higher damage. There's ice damage pulsing all over you in the area. So when you pull everyone in, when you pop Deep Freeze, your ultimate, you deal damage. But also remember that we modified this so that when Deep Freeze ends, it deals 100% additional damage, and you can even make it deal damage based on how much damage you had rolling, which is really cool. So it just makes your ultimate stronger. I don't think it's entirely necessary because remember, Deep Freeze does have 1 minute cooldown, which can be lowered by your Ice Blades procs. But from that standpoint, it's an option if you wanted to go for an offhand that has some modifier there. Lastly, let's go through my first pass of the Paragon board. Some of this is getting shaky, and there's even some rumors that they're going to make some Paragon board changes that no one's heard about going into the release. So some of these builds might just be, they might just have to be redone depending on that. But the reason I do the Paragon boards is so that I can get familiar with all of the boards for all of the classes, but also so that I don't leave you high and dry. If you hit level 50, which you will quite quickly, and you want to start getting into Paragon, but you don't want to think about it right away while you're enjoying the game, I want to have a build here that has plenty of synergies in it. It may not be the most perfected, battle-tested version of the Paragon, but it does work perfectly for the build, and it's something that you can use as reference as you explore going into the end game and unlocking your Paragon. So for Arctic Splinter, let's go through this Paragon board. When it comes to stats, stats are different for every single class. For this build particularly, we like actually dexterity, intelligence, and willpower. So dexterity will give us crit chance. For necromancers, intelligence gives skill damage, and willpower gives resource generation. They're all pretty good. Intelligence probably has the highest weighting of those, and then it depends on how much the avalanche and the mana reduction comes into play. It could mean that when you're fully geared out and your build is perfect, you have less need for willpower because you actually don't go down in mana that much, and you can put more points into dexterity for extra crit chance. But I think while leveling and when you first hit 50 and unlock Paragon, I think intelligence and willpower probably makes the most sense, just to make sure you have enough mana to spam your ice shards as you go out. So as we're going through, we're going to be focusing on intelligence and willpower and dexterity if we can't get either of those. So we're going to come up, we're going to get the defensives. I think a great glyph to focus on for any mana or resource hungry build is going to be the Unleash glyph, which is it grants bonus to magic nodes, and if you trigger the extra passive after spending 50 mana, which you'll spend very easily, you deal increased damage and gain increased mana regeneration, which is easy. These are all just magic damage and resistance options here, which is really cool. We like that. The primary boards that you want for this build is going to be Frigid Fate, which is probably your best board in general, and then you also want to pick up Icefall. Both of these work great for all Frost builds, and I think the Frigid Fate is probably the best one that you want to focus on. You want to get damage to vulnerable targets. We've already talked about how much that works for this build. We also want to pick up more vulnerable damage over here, damage reduction from vulnerable, cold resistance, and then we even get some lucky hit chance over here as well, which is really cool. And then for the key passive or the legendary node, dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies increases your lucky hit chance by 1% for 5 seconds, up to 15%. So we get even more lucky hit out of this, which makes all of our proc chances go up. It's not 1-to-1. I'll make a video on how lucky hit actually works. You can think of lucky hit as just your proc chance, but I don't know why they decided to rebrand it to make it different, but adding more proc chance to this build makes it a lot stronger. I also like picking up the Enchanter glyph. This gives you increased magic damage, and if you equip 2 enchantment slots, you get resistance to skills element, which with this board, you'll have pretty high frost resistance, which is probably one of the more annoying elements to deal with out on the field. So that's a pretty cool bonus as well. Coming over to your second board, Icefall is another great pickup. It gives us some damage reduction from chilled targets, damage to chilled targets, which we're going to chill constantly all the time. More magic damage, more damage to chilled targets. All of that works great. We come over here, we get more damage reduction from chilled targets, and then cold damage as well. So we'll have even cold application or chill application is really good. All of that fits into the build. For glyph, I like picking up the winter glyph. This increases the nodes that deal cold damage and damage reduction, which makes sure you put it in your sum. This one works great in this spot, but there's a few spots where this could work as well. And the additional bonus means that when you chill an enemy, you deal increased cold damage for 10 seconds up to 15%. So all of your damage is cold. This just gives you more damage amp, which is really cool. And the key passive or the legendary node is killing a frozen enemy grants you 15% of your max life as a barrier. Again, we talked about how important barriers are and allow us to open up more damage option and make our shards better. So this means that when we kill a frozen enemy, we get a barrier. Even more barriers, it means we can have pretty high uptime on barriers. All that synergizes really well. Then when you have extra points here, you can come into, I like putting the static surge up here because we can just dip our toes in from below and pick up extra mana, extra mana, extra mana. So max mana, max mana, max mana means that we can spend more. Excellent, we like that. Coming into Elemental Summoner from the left side means we can do the same thing. We can pick up maximum mana, maximum mana, maximum mana, and some percent life. And you can also come down here and get Conjuration skill damage plus attack speed. Attack speed helps Ice Shards. It means that it can finish its cast up faster, which is really nice. And you can make your Ice Blades stronger. There are ways that you can modify Ice Blades if you really wanted to. You can make it so you have a chance to spawn additional Ice Blades. And if it ends up parsing better than some of your secondary abilities, you can actually put Ice Blades more in the forefront for this build. But it's an option for the Paragon there if you're looking for it. So that is the Arctic Splinter build focused on Ice Shards. I think it's really cool to look at. You're just a submachine gun just flying and spraying and spraying everyone on screen. I think the damage potential is really cool as well. And it turns out to be a pretty safe build as well. So if you enjoyed the build, leave a comment, leave a like down below. It helps me out tremendously. I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.